Hi there, my name is Sujane, and in this lesson we will be learning how to create a basic composition using just four simple principles: C, A, R, and P. So the first principle that we're going to look at today is contrast. Contrast basically means highlighting what is important by making it slightly different. So in this example, we can see that there are four birds altogether, but there is one bird that is white in color. So with contrast, we can emphasize on this bird and make it the focus point of this composition. Let's take a look at another example. So in this composition, we can see that the word contrast is being highlighted in pink in comparison to the other words, thus making contrast the emphasis of this composition. So how can we create contrast? We can create contrast by differentiating different elements or attributes. So take a look at this example. We want to highlight the word contrast. So what we can do is we can change the color perhaps to maybe a red color. So that way the word contrast is different from the other words and it's being highlighted and emphasized. Besides colors, we can also change the attribute by changing the boldness of the font. And that way, we can also still create a difference between the word contrast and also the other words, thus making it still the emphasis of this composition. The next principle we're going to take a look at is alignment. Alignment depicts the way every element is being placed in a design. So when objects are aligned on a certain grid, you can see that the composition looks better. Whereas if it's not aligned on a certain grid and it's all over the place, it looks really messy and it can affect the design of the composition. So in this example, we can see that the words are not aligned, but when we align things together, putting it on a certain grid or a certain axis, we can make the composition a little bit better. And then it creates order in chaos. Let's take a look at some examples of good alignment and bad alignment. In these two examples, we can see that the example on the left has got a lot of elements and it's not aligned up together, making the design very messy and very hard to read as well. Whereas you can see that even though there are a lot of different elements, they are all aligned very nicely on a certain grid, thus making things very easy to read. The third principle that we're going to look at is repetition. It basically means repeating a certain element or a certain attribute. With repetition, it can maintain consistency in design. It also gives an identity to a design. You can repeat different things like colors or shapes, textures, or even fonts. Let's take a look at some examples. With repetition, we may have a lot of different elements. So for example, in this composition, we may want to repeat the font. So what we can do is we can select a consistent font and repeat it over and over again. And you can see the composition is more consistent now. We can create repetition by repeating the colors. So we can select a color and we can repeat the same color to make sure that each element, even though different, you can see that it's consistent in the colors. A repetition can also be created by repeating a certain shape. Bullet points are great examples of repetition in a composition. So for example, in this composition, we want to repeat the same shape over and over again so that it creates a certain pattern. Let's take a look at some real-life examples of how repetition can make a composition better. So in this example, we can see that there are repetition in terms of the patterns and also the colors that is being used, even though that there are different elements. In this example, we can see that there are repetition in the fonts that is being used and also in the colors that is being used. The last principle that we want to talk about today is proximity. With proximity, it refers to the space between each element. With elements that are associated with each other, it should be placed closely together, but else elements that are not associated with each other should be placed slightly further apart. As you can see, I have a few different elements together over here on this composition, and the proximity is not fixed yet. So it can get a little bit confusing when people are reading it. How we can fix the proximity is by making sure the elements that are related together are placed closer together. But else elements that are not related together can be placed further apart, creating a white space or a gap in between. This creates a break between each category and it improves the readability as well. Let's take a look at some real-life examples of how proximity is being applied. In this example on the left, we can see that the proximity of this composition is very well done. We can see and differentiate each category very clearly. But else the examples on the right, it's a little bit hard to read because there is no breathing space and there is no clear differentiation between each category. In this example, you can see how the designer differentiates each category and breaks information up apart so that it's easier for people to read. So that is the 4 basic principles that you can apply to your design: contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. Now, try this on your own and see if you can design a biography by applying the principles that we have learned today. You can include a little introduction of yourself, your name, your age, your school, your hobbies, your aspiration, and even a photo of yourself. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Is that weird?